Kristy, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ashley. I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting. It's so fun to get to talk about the wedding veil.
Well, you probably don't know this about me, but I studied fashion history in grad school.
I did not know that. Oh my
I wrote
goodness.
my thesis and dissertation on wedding customs and traditions in history. So I am
I mean,
particularly excited to chat about your novel, The Wedding Veil.
could not be more perfect for you.
So let's start by telling our listeners what the book is about.
Okay, so this is a story about 4 generations of women and a family heirloom that bonds them. So the story begins, the historical part, in 1914 when George Vanderbilt has just suddenly passed away, leaving behind a young widow, Edith, and his daughter, Cornelia. And the two of them sort of make it their life mission to bond together and not only save Biltmore, which is, kind of his life's work, but also to really preserve his legacy. But when the two start to have differing ideas about what the future might look like, sort of a struggle ensues between them. And in the present day, Julia, one of our protagonists, is getting ready to walk down the aisle, and her grandmother is putting their faded family wedding veil on her head when she realizes that if she marries the man she's about to marry, she is going to be the one to sully the name of the good luck veil in their family. And so she ends up running away from her wedding and escaping actually to her honeymoon to figure out what her next steps are. And at the same time, her grandmother, Babs, who is the one driving the getaway car, is making some big decisions about her life and her future in the wake of losing the love of her life, who she has been with for more than 60 years. So this is really a story about these, 4 very different women in very different time periods who find themselves in similar struggles with this kind of this veil as at the center of the story.
I think it's always fun to hear about the initial spark of an idea that inspired authors to write a novel. And of course, given my background, I'm particularly interested to hear what inspired you to write The Wedding Veil.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope this isn't too long of a story because it is kind of like a multi-layered one.
Tell us
but
everything.
Okay, good. So in 2018? 2018. I live on the coast of North Carolina, and there was a big hurricane coming toward the coast. And so my family decided to evacuate to Asheville. And our son was, I guess, 7 at the time, and he had never been to Biltmore before. And so we were like, okay, well, while we're evacuating, we'll go to Biltmore. We'll kind of like pretend we're on vacation, not worrying about, our house and our town and all of these things. So we were at Biltmore, which I had been to many times before. I grew up just a few hours from there. And it just struck me for the first time, like how young Edith Vanderbilt was when she was left a widow. And I really didn't know a lot of things about her history, in particular that, you think she would have been left this massive fortune. But in reality, her daughter Cornelia was left almost all of her husband's assets, and she didn't receive them until she was 25 years old, which was 12 years after he died. So Edith had a big struggle ahead of her to try to maintain, this home and this town that really she pretty much owned most of Asheville at that point. And just a lot of struggles sort of ensued for her. And I was just fascinated at how, in this time before women could even vote, she was able to kind of keep up this monumental task. And so, how when you're in a place and you're so excited to be there and you like go to the gift shop and you like buy all these things thinking like, oh, I'm really going to want to remember this trip. And then, you get home and you're like, great, it's a bunch of junk that I don't have any space for. But so fortunately, I had bought a bunch of books in the gift shop, and I just started reading. And I got home and I started looking for more about Edith because I wanted to read more about her. And I kept saying, I can't believe no one's written a novel about her. Someone should write a novel about her. Never imagining that it would be me. So fast forward probably like another year, 18 months, and my cousin was getting married back in the mountains. And my husband's family has this beautiful like heirloom wedding veil that a lot of people in his family have worn, and friends have worn, and things like that. And so my sister-in-law had passed it on to me, and I passed it along to my cousin. And I was sort of putting the veil on her head, and we were the last people in the bridal suite before she was getting ready to walk down the aisle. And I said something like, isn't it neat how this veil connects us to all these women, and a lot of them who will probably never even know or who aren't even here anymore? And we were both kind of like, that's a book.
Definitely.
So I was like, okay, this is my next book. It's going to be called The Wedding Veil. And I was telling my agent about it. And I had this sort of like sketch of an idea of what the story was going to be about. And she was like, I love this. It's perfect for you. And then she was like, what if you wrote about a real historical wedding veil? And I remember almost kind of rolling my eyes because I thought, how am I going to find a real historical wedding veil worn by a woman that I'm so interested in that I want to spend the next year of my life researching her? That just didn't really seem possible. But I did a quick Google search one night. I was just up, kind of not able to sleep. And I Googled Edith Vanderbilt wedding veil. And a story popped up about this veil worn by Edith's mother, her three sisters, Edith, her daughter Cornelia, and then the veil disappeared. And I was like, what happened to the Vanderbilt veil? And this is my story. So it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, like this is a sign. This is the book I'm supposed to write. And I literally started writing the book that night. I wrote one of the chapter that you'll see of Edith's wedding, where she's standing in the back of the church wishing that her mother were there, even though her mother has been dead since she was 10 years old. So that was the beginning.
Oh, that's so serendipitous. Those two stories coming together. I love that.
I love when that happens. I really it was like just little bits and pieces there over a few years. And I just felt like it was the right time and the right story. And it was great fun to work on.
Well, it'll probably come as no surprise that research is my favorite part of the writing process. Yeah. I love learning new things, discovering untold stories like the Vanderbilt veil, and figuring out how to fit what I'm learning into a plot. So could you tell us a bit about your research process? Any exciting moments you had while researching for the wedding veil?
Well, we make plans and that doesn't always work out. And so, I had pitched this story and I got home from tour on March 9th of 2020 and was getting ready to start researching for the wedding veil. And it was my first, true historical novel about real women and, all of that. And so this was definitely going to be, a very different effort than I had ever undertaken before. And I had pictured, I was like going to buy, the annual pass to Biltmore. And I had made contact with several librarians and like different libraries throughout the state who, were going to help me with like research and artifacts and things like that. And then of course we know what happened. The world shut down. So I was under contract and the book had to be written and there was nothing that I could do about it. So fortunately, I had bought pretty much every book ever written that had the word Vanderbilt in it, even if it didn't have anything to do with these Vanderbilts. And I burned up my newspapers.com account. I mean, I joked that like if Edith or Cornelia Vanderbilt were in a newspaper article, I have read it. There were a lot of them. And it was so interesting because, families that famous at that time were written about all the time. And there were gossip columns everywhere. But a lot of times what you were reading wasn't labeled as a gossip column. So it was sort of like, our version of the National Enquirer, but it was in like, the Kansas City Star. I shouldn't have said their name. They probably did great reporting, but there was something I quoted of them saying about the Vanderbilts. But, that was an interesting part for me because I realized pretty quickly that some of this research I was doing like wasn't correct, even if it was from, I went to journalism school. And so, we were always taught to rely on our primary sources first and foremost. So going into this, I thought, okay, well, my newspapers are going to be my tip top resource. And that didn't necessarily turn out to be true all the time. So, but fortunately, between the internet and books and some amazing librarians who helped me along the way, I was able to at least figure out, what period of these women's lives I was writing about. What is the story that I'm telling? What is the message that I want people to walk away with from this? And I actually had the first draft done before Biltmore was even open enough that like I could go, with like permission. So it actually was really helpful in some ways that I wasn't expecting because I felt like by the time I was actually able to really be like in the trenches, interviewing people and talking more about the story, I knew what the story was. So I very specifically knew like, this is what I need to fact check, or this is a part of the story that I'm struggling with, or this is something that I know belongs in the story, but I can't find any research about it, things like that. So it started out as something that really panicked me, but I think it ended up in the end kind of being a gift that I was able to like step into this at the end of the project instead of the beginning. Because I think at the beginning, it could have felt overwhelming to me and would have made it even harder for me to decide this piece is my story.
I imagine research changed for a lot of books that are being published right now.
Oh, can you imagine?
Yeah,
I know. When I think about like my friend Kristy Harmel, for example, she wrote The Forest of Vanishing Stars, and she was going to go to Poland to do the research for that book, and she couldn't. And so she actually, it was funny because we were like writing these books at the same time. And so every day she'd be like, listen to what I learned about the forest. Or, so she was able to find some really great resources and people there who like very, very much helped her. But yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable just to think about, the things that we thought we were going to be doing and then how it changed. And like, thank goodness for the internet. We wouldn't have been able to do all these things.
Well, this is your 9th published novel. Is that correct?
Yes.
This makes you the most veteran author I've interviewed for this podcast.
Wow, that's amazing. Yay.
So
I can't believe that. I feel like I haven't been doing it that long.
Well, I am new to this podcast, so I've only interviewed like 4 or 5 authors.
Okay, well, then that's,
But I want to know what advice you have for aspiring authors.
Oh gosh, so many things, but this is going to maybe sound like the most obvious thing in the world, but the question that I get the very, very most from people is, how do you finish the book? Like literally, that is the question that I get the very most. And I think there has to be some sort of like psychological thing that we like keep ourselves from finishing the book, because when we finish it, then we have to put it out there, and then we have to do the hard part and get rejected and, all of those things. So my like number one piece of advice is finish the book no matter what. If it's the wrong ending, if it ends with, them at the hardware store buying new flags for their front porch, like whatever, like the worst ending in the world, but get there and write the end, because you can always go back and change it. You can always go back and edit. And like personally, I spend about probably 3 times as long editing as I do writing. So just because you have it on the page doesn't mean it has to be set in stone.
Speaking of finishing a novel, in addition to writing novels, you also are developing a television series with NBC based on your Peachtree Bluff books. You run an interior design blog called Design Chic with your mom. You have a hit weekly web show and podcast, Friends in Fiction. You write articles for a number of magazines. You serve on boards, speak at conferences. I could go on and on, not to mention you're also a mom. So I don't know how you finish a novel. What does a day in your life look like with all of those things happening?
Chaos. Just kidding. It kind of depends on like where I am in my schedule. So right now, is sort of like launch time and getting ready. We're pre-recording this. I hope it's okay that I'm saying this, but I'm about to head out on book tour for The Wedding Veil. And so for the next month, 5 weeks, touring for The Wedding Veil is like basically what I'm doing. And a lot of other things just have to go by the wayside, because, when you're on the road like that and fitting in, things like this and in between, that's really all there's kind of time for. But, and I'll do Friends in Fiction, of course, too. But I try to write in the mornings, because that tends to be the time where like the house is quiet and everything hasn't like erupted yet, if that makes sense. Like everyone doesn't need me yet, and so that's kind of my first thing that I do in the morning. I try to write for like an hour or 2, but I try to get in about 2,000 words. So sometimes it's 90 minutes and sometimes it's 3 hours. And, I never really know how that's going to fall. With The Wedding Veil, it was usually a lot longer, because I was sort of researching as I was writing and trying to make sure that I was getting facts right along the way. But then after that, it's just, I don't have like a true, like I have a big list for the day and I'm just like trying to check it off as I go, but it works out, and I think everything kind of feeds everything else. And my mom and I have actually had the design blog Design Chic for much longer than I've been an author. My first book came out in 2015 and we launched Design Chic in 2010. So that's been a part of my life for a long, long time. And then Friends in Fiction was a surprise. I mean, it was something we started on a whim. For those of people who are listening who don't know about Friends in Fiction, it's a group that I have with Mary Kate Andrews and Kristy Harmel and Patty Callahan Henry. And we go live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. with an amazing author. We've had a lot of great people on the show. But, that is definitely something that we take seriously. We have like a couple of meetings every week, and it's definitely turned into something that we never could have expected. And this show has been really great fun. We're kind of at a stopping point right now because we've finished writing the pilot, and I think we'll probably have another round of notes for that. So we're just kind of in that in between where we're waiting for sort of like our last round of notes on the pilot. And but that's been really exciting, and something that, gosh, we've been working on since the Southern Side. I was going to say the last book in the Peachtree Bluff series, but that's not true because that Christmas in Peachtree Bluff came out in October. But since the Southern Side of Paradise, which was like the third book in the series, came out, it got optioned right after that. And so we've been working on it ever since. And of course, again, the pandemic slowed things down and made things a little bit different, but it's been very fun. But all that to say, every day is kind of different. There's no there's certain things that are on the list every single day that have to get done every single day. And then, beyond that, it's just, trying to figure out like what's next and what I need to be doing. So it's always fun.
With all your spare time, I'm sure you do a bit of reading. Can you tell us a bit about your reading world? What do you like to read? What books would you recommend right now?
I do a ton of reading. I love to read. I feel like, not always, but I feel like for the most part, writers are readers, right? And so recently, some of my favorites, I'm trying to think of things that I've read that are out. The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis was so, so good. She was just on Friends and Fiction. I will say Friends and Fiction informs my reading in a big way because I'm always trying to make sure like I'm up to date on, reading our guests' work, which doesn't always happen, but certainly if I'm hosting that night. I just read my first Colleen Hoover book for a Friends and Fiction episode. That was awesome. Reminders of Him was so good. Woman on Fire by Lisa Barr is a new release that I love Lisa. Like, it's such a great book. And then upcoming things, Mary Kay Andrews has The Homewreckers coming out in May. It's so great. Like, I think one of my favorites of hers. We had Jane.
Puppy, so I can't wait to dive in.
Yes, I know, it's so good. We just had Jane Allen on Friends and Fiction recently, and she's the Black Girls Must Be Exhausted series, and the latest is Black Girls Must Be Magic, and she's incredible, like just so great. And then Guilt by Jamie Brenner is another one coming out this summer that's just so good and should be on everyone's TBR.
I always want to know what's next for authors. Can you tell us anything about what you're working on or your work in progress?
Yes, I can. So I actually just signed a new 2-book deal with my publisher, so I'm super excited about that, and it's always fun. I can't tell you too much about the book. I can tell you my working title. I don't know if it'll be the title, but the working title is called The Summer of Songbirds, which I kind of like. I love alliteration, so I don't know. And sometimes, like, when titles come to me randomly and weirdly, I'm like, oh, that must be the title. And that one came to me randomly and weirdly. So I'm like, maybe that's the title. So we'll see if it ends up being the title. But it's a book about 3 best friends and one of their aunts who owns a girls' summer camp. That ended up sort of changing all of their lives in various and sundry ways. And the camp is in danger and they are coming back together to try to save it. But at the same time, each of them is facing kind of a big ethical or moral dilemma that affects all the other ones. So there's a lot of complication going on, and of course some love stories, because I love a good love story. So there's a lot happening in this book, but it was really fun for me to write. I love the friendships in the book and the romances and just the idea of like this sisterhood. And I really, truly, I think I was at a time where I was like, where do I want to go right now? It was like everything was still sort of shut down. Everything was crazy. And I was like, where do I want to go? And I was like, I want to go to camp. And we had gone to family camp with a bunch of friends and their families. And I felt like the walls were kind of speaking to me in this camp that had been there for like, generations and generations. And I was like, I want to write a book about a generational camp. And, so it was great fun to write. And I can't wait to share it with everyone.
I also want to share how people can find you. Tell us where you hang out on social media and your social media handles.
Absolutely. So my website is KristyWoodsonHarvey.com. And of course, I'm super active over on Friends and Fiction on Facebook and YouTube. My Instagram is at Kristy W. Harvey, and my Facebook is Kristy Woodson Harvey, and my Twitter is Kristy W. Harvey. So, but Instagram and Facebook are probably where I'm most.
And before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, I don't think so. I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to read this book and for all you do to, help promote my work in particular and all the authors out there, and for sharing words with people. It's a wonderful gift, and I'm very appreciative.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It is such a pleasure meeting you today.
Me too.
I hope to get the opportunity to meet in person sometime.
Me too. I hope so too. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.